It began in the shadows in Washington, 1942. While the world's attention was fixed on the front lines of North Africa, the Pacific, and Europe, a new kind of warfare was quietly taking shape in the heart of the U.S. Capitol. It wasn't fought with tanks or bombers, but with deception, sabotage, and secrets. The United States had entered the global intelligence game, and its first player was the newly formed Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. At the helm stood Major General William J. Donovan, a decorated World War I hero known for his audacity and brilliance. Nicknamed Wild Bill, Donovan had witnessed firsthand how fragmented American intelligence efforts were. Each military branch operated its own network, and crucial information was often lost in bureaucracy. Donovan envisioned something different, a single, agile agency capable of operating anywhere in the world, blending espionage, propaganda, and special operations into one lethal force. In June 1942, with President Roosevelt's approval, that vision became reality. The OSS was born in secrecy. Its mission, to collect intelligence, support resistance movements, and carry out covert operations behind enemy lines. From its inception, the OSS drew talent from unexpected places: linguists, journalists, athletes, and scientists. Harvard graduates trained alongside lumberjacks, actors, and foreign refugees. Their diversity became their strength. Many recruits trained in the secluded fields of Catoctin Mountain Park, Maryland, a place now known as Camp David, learning how to fight dirty, break codes, and disappear. The world they entered was one of shadows. In occupied Europe, the German Abwehr and Gestapo maintained a vast counterintelligence web. Betrayal could mean capture or death. OSS agents operated in small, untraceable units, often using false identities and forged papers. Many of their missions had no guarantee of success or survival. But Donovan's philosophy was simple: we are building an organization that will take risks. Every war is won by the man who takes the last risk. The first OSS operatives infiltrated Vichy France and neutral Spain, posing as businessmen, journalists, and even priests. Their reports uncovered the movements of German U-boats, V-2 rocket sites, and secret supply routes through the Pyrenees. One OSS informant's coded message, a simple reference to tobacco shipments delayed, alerted Allied command to a shift in the German Atlantic convoy schedule, saving hundreds of lives. Meanwhile, in the East, the OSS worked with the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, the agency Winston Churchill had famously described as setting Europe ablaze. Together, they trained resistance fighters in sabotage and communications. OSS officers helped arm the French Maquis, coordinate partisan warfare in Yugoslavia, and even gather intelligence on Japanese movements in Burma. The alliance wasn't always smooth. The British considered the Americans inexperienced, but their combined efforts would soon reshape the war's secret battlefield. The OSS also began to pioneer new technologies. Engineers developed miniature cameras hidden in cigarette lighters, silk maps that could be swallowed, and time-delay explosives disguised as lumps of coal. Psychological warfare experts crafted propaganda leaflets and fake radio broadcasts to erode German morale. One experimental unit, the Morale Operations Branch, specialized in what Donovan called the weaponization of rumor. These tactics would later evolve into the sophisticated psychological operations of the modern CIA. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the OSS was its quiet anonymity. Many of its agents operated with no official recognition, no military insignia, and no expectation of reward. They worked in the gray areas of war, gathering scraps of intelligence, recruiting informants, and risking capture daily. A single mistake could mean exposure. Yet without their unseen efforts, Allied victories like D-Day might have faced far bloodier outcomes. One such operative, Virginia Hall, an American woman with a wooden leg who had been rejected from the U.S. Foreign Service, became one of the most effective OSS agents in France. Nicknamed the Limping Lady by the Gestapo, she coordinated sabotage missions and organized resistance cells across occupied territory. By the time Paris was liberated, she was one of the most wanted women in Europe, but her identity remained secret for decades. By late 1944, the OSS had grown to more than 13,000 personnel operating across the globe, from Cairo to Chongqing. Their missions ranged from rescuing downed airmen to mapping invasion routes and capturing German scientists. Yet even as their successes mounted, their stories remained sealed, hidden under the label classified. The OSS was never meant for glory. Its victories were measured in whispers and coded transmissions. As the war turned in the Allies' favor, Donovan's vision expanded. He proposed a permanent intelligence agency, one that could operate in peacetime as effectively as it did in war. but not everyone agreed. Rival generals and politicians feared the power of a secret organization accountable only to the president. Internal conflict brewed, and when the war ended, the OSS future hung in the balance. Still, before the agency's dissolution in 1945, it left behind a legacy of unseen triumphs and buried secrets. Hidden among the countless declassified files were operations so daring, so unconventional, that even decades later they seemed the stuff of legend. Operations that tested human courage and ingenuity, and changed the course of history in ways the public would never fully know. The next chapters reveal 5 of those missions, the most secret OSS operations of World War II. Each one conducted in silence, sealed in mystery, and hidden from history itself. In the final years of World War II, as Allied forces fought across Europe, a quiet race was unfolding, one that could determine the fate of the world. Intelligence reports hinted that Nazi Germany was developing a miracle weapon, a bomb of unimaginable power. The question was chilling. How close were they? To find the answer, the Office of Strategic Services launched one of its most secret missions, Operation Alsos. Alsos, meaning grove in Greek, was chosen as a subtle nod to the mission's leader, Colonel Boris Pash, a former Army officer and security commander of the Manhattan Project. His orders came directly from General Leslie Groves, head of America's atomic bomb program. The mission was simple in wording but perilous in execution. Follow the Allied advance across Europe, locate and seize all evidence of German nuclear research, and capture the scientists before they could fall into Soviet hands. The stakes could not have been higher. If Germany was close to creating an atomic weapon, the balance of power and the future of the war would change overnight. The Allies had already seen what Nazi science could produce. The V-1 and V-2 rockets raining destruction on London. An atomic bomb in Hitler's arsenal would be catastrophic. In late 1943, small reconnaissance teams began their work in Italy, interrogating captured German scientists and searching laboratories in Rome and Milan. The initial findings were puzzling. There were fragments of nuclear research, scattered notes, crude experimental devices, but no clear evidence of a functioning bomb program. Still, there were enough clues to justify a deeper push. By mid-1944, as the Allies prepared for the D-Day invasion, the OSS and the Alsos team followed the trail into France. Traveling behind advancing divisions, often within artillery range of the front, they swept through towns like Cherbourg and Paris, seizing scientific documents before they could be destroyed. The discoveries were mounting uranium samples, cyclotrons, and blueprints for reactors, but still, the heart of the operation lay further east in Germany itself. As General Patton's Third Army stormed across the Rhine in early 1945, Colonel Pash and his scientific advisor, Samuel Goudsmit, a Dutch-born physicist, moved with them. Goudsmit's role was crucial, to evaluate the scientific data and determine how far the Germans had truly progressed. They soon learned of a small town in southwestern Germany, Hagerloch, where a hidden laboratory was rumored to contain a functioning nuclear reactor. The race was on. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, and the OSS had orders to prevent German nuclear assets from falling into their hands. On April 23, 1945, Alsos operatives and elements of the U.S. 7th Army entered Hagerloch. Beneath the local church, in a cave carved into the hillside, they found it, the remnants of Germany's nuclear reactor. Suspended cubes of uranium hung in a web of cables above a pool of heavy water, designed to moderate the chain reaction. It was an extraordinary sight, the tangible proof of how close Nazi Germany had come. Yet it wasn't enough to create a bomb. Goudsmit's analysis confirmed that Germany's nuclear program was fragmented, underfunded, and hindered by internal rivalries. Hitler's scientists, including Werner Heisenberg, had miscalculated key elements of the physics required for a sustained reaction. The Nazi bomb, as it turned out, was far from completion. But that knowledge came only after immense risk and loss. In the days following the Hagerloch raid, OSS agents captured several leading German physicists, including Heisenberg himself, during Operation Epsilon. They were quietly transported to England and detained at Farm Hall, a secluded estate wired with microphones. For months, British intelligence listened as the scientists discussed the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Their shock was genuine. They had never imagined the Allies could achieve such a weapon. Operation Alsos was officially classified for decades. Only fragments of its reports surfaced publicly after the war, buried beneath layers of secrecy. Yet its success had been monumental. The mission had not only prevented Nazi atomic research from continuing but also safeguarded vital intelligence from the Soviets, who were already preparing to carve out their sphere of influence in post-war Europe. Colonel Pash would later remark that the true victory of Alsos was not in what we found, but in what we denied our enemies. The OSS silent march through occupied Europe had revealed not only the limits of Nazi science but the new frontier of warfare, the age of atomic intelligence. Still, unanswered questions lingered. How close had the Germans really been? What information slipped away before Alsos arrived? Some scientists, records showed, vanished in the final weeks of the war, taking with them years of research. Rumors spread that Soviet forces recovered parts of a second experimental reactor near Berlin. Others whispered that a train carrying enriched uranium disappeared somewhere between Munich and Salzburg. These fragments, these shadows of truth, left a legacy of uncertainty, a reminder that even in victory, not all secrets are uncovered. For the OSS, Alsos was only the beginning. The agency's appetite for risk, secrecy, and discovery would soon be tested again, not in laboratories but deep in enemy territory, where lives hung in the balance and success depended on courage, deception, and the will to survive. Next came a mission unlike any other, a rescue behind enemy lines that defied the odds, and whose full story would remain hidden for decades. Operation Halyard. By the summer of 1944, the skies above Europe were filled with the thunder of Allied bombers. From the Italian airfields of Foggia and Bari, American B-17s and B-24s soared northward on daylight raids against German oil refineries and industrial targets in the Balkans. The missions were deadly. Anti-aircraft fire, Luftwaffe fighters, and treacherous mountain winds claimed hundreds of aircraft. Yet the real tragedy awaited those who survived, the airmen who parachuted into Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia. Among the dense forests and rugged peaks of Serbia, they landed behind enemy lines, cut off from all communication, surrounded by German patrols. By late 1944, more than 500 Allied airmen had been shot down during missions over the Ploiești oil fields in Romania and southeastern Europe. Most were presumed missing or dead. But hidden in the mountains they were very much alive. The U.S. Office of Strategic Services received fragments of intelligence suggesting that local villagers and resistance fighters were sheltering the downed airmen, feeding them and protecting them from capture. But communication was scarce and the situation grew desperate. That's when the OSS conceived one of its most audacious rescue missions of the war, Operation Halyard. The operation's objective was simple in theory but perilous in practice: to extract hundreds of stranded airmen from behind enemy lines without alerting German forces. The plan would require coordination between the OSS, the U.S. Army Air Forces, and the Yugoslav resistance movement led by General Draza Mihailovic. But there was a catch. By 1944, Allied command had shifted political support to the rival communist partisans under Josip Broz Tito, creating deep mistrust. Nevertheless, OSS officer George Muselin, a Serbian-American fluent in the language, volunteered to lead the mission. On the night of August 2, 1944, Muselin, along with a small team of radio operators and technicians, parachuted into central Serbia near the village of Pranjani. They were greeted not by soldiers but by local farmers, men, women, and even children who had risked everything to protect the Americans. For months, villagers had hidden airmen in barns and mountain huts, sharing their scarce food despite German reprisals. Muselin immediately began assessing the situation. Hundreds of men were scattered across miles of mountainous terrain, dressed in peasant clothes, some weakened by malnutrition and illness. Yet morale was astonishingly high. They never lost hope, Muselin later recalled in his report. They trusted that someone somewhere would come for them. With the help of Mihailovic's Chetnik guerrillas, the OSS team cleared a makeshift landing strip on a remote plateau near Pranjani. Using farm tools and oxen, the villagers leveled the field by hand. It had to be perfect, flat, firm, and at least 700 yards long. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could expose the operation and bring German troops down upon them. On August 9, 1944, after weeks of preparation, the first signal was sent by radio to Bari. The field was ready. Just before midnight, the deep hum of aircraft engines echoed through the valley. 3 C-47 transport planes, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, appeared against the night sky. As they descended, bonfires lit by villagers outlined the landing strip. Against all odds, the first planes touched down safely. The airmen, stunned by the precision and bravery of their rescuers, boarded quietly. Within minutes, the C-47s roared back into the darkness, carrying the first group of 40 men to safety. Over the following nights, more flights followed, always under the cover of darkness, always under the threat of discovery. By the time Operation Halyard concluded in December 1944, 512 Allied airmen had been rescued without the loss of a single life. The success of Halyard was a triumph of coordination, courage, and humanity. It was also a delicate political affair. Tito's communist forces later accused the OSS of collaborating with Mihailovic, whom the Allies had officially abandoned. As a result, the mission's details were suppressed for years, buried under Cold War politics. Official recognition for the Serbian villagers and Chetnik fighters never came. Decades later, declassified OSS files and survivor testimonies revealed the full scope of the operation. Airmen described being hidden in haylofts, carried on horseback through mountain passes, and fed by families who risked execution if caught. "They treated us like their own sons," recalled Lieutenant Richard Fellman, one of the rescued flyers. "Without them we would never have survived." The OSS' ability to coordinate such a massive evacuation under enemy occupation was unprecedented. It demonstrated not only technical and logistical brilliance but also the profound human bonds forged in war, between strangers united by courage. When the last plane lifted off from the Pranjani field, the villagers stood silently in the glow of the fires, watching the aircraft disappear over the horizon. For them, there were no medals, no headlines, no official thanks. The war continued, and many who had helped would later face reprisals as political tides shifted in post-war Yugoslavia. Operation Halyard remained one of the most successful and least-known rescue missions in history, a feat of planning and sacrifice that epitomized the OSS spirit, quiet heroism in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet even as the agency celebrated its hidden victories, tragedy loomed on another front. For not every OSS mission ended with rescue and redemption. Some ended in silence and death. One such story, buried for decades under classified seals, would come to symbolize both the bravery and the cost of covert warfare. It began along the rocky shores of Italy, with a mission called Operation Ginny II. By early 1944, the tide of war had turned in Europe, but the price of progress was still paid in blood. The Allies had landed in Italy, pushing north toward Rome and beyond, yet the German defense remained fierce, fortified along the rugged terrain of the Ligurian coast. Behind those lines, a handful of OSS commandos prepared for a mission that would test the limits of courage and secrecy. It would become one of the most tragic and least known operations of the entire war, Operation Ginny II. The mission was born out of necessity. Allied bombers striking northern Italy relied heavily on intelligence about German supply routes, troop movements, and coastal defenses. One particular rail tunnel near Fermura, east of La Spezia, was vital to the German 14th Army. Trains carried ammunition and reinforcements through it daily, feeding the Wehrmacht's front lines. Destroying that tunnel could cripple German logistics for weeks. The task was assigned to the OSS 2677th Regiment, Company D, a unit of saboteurs trained for stealth operations behind enemy lines. Most were Americans of Italian descent, fluent in the language and familiar with the culture. Their orders: land by night, infiltrate the coastline, and plant explosives on the railway. It was a mission that demanded precision, timing, and absolute secrecy. The first attempt, Operation Ginny I, launched in February 1944, ended in failure when bad weather forced the commandos to turn back. But the OSS wasn't willing to abandon the plan. A second attempt, codenamed Ginny II, was approved by Mediterranean Command for the night of March 22, 1944. 11 men, led by Lieutenant Vincent Russo, would take part. They embarked aboard 2 PT boats from Corsica, carrying explosives, silenced weapons, and a single radio. The men were confident, trained in demolition, navigation, and guerrilla tactics, yet none could have foreseen what awaited them. The boats departed under moonless skies, heading toward the Italian coast. As they approached, rough seas and a navigational error pushed them several miles off course. When dawn broke, they found themselves far from their intended landing site. Their cover was gone. Still, determined to complete the mission, the men rowed their rubber dinghies toward shore, straight into enemy territory. By midday on March 23, they were spotted by Italian civilians near Fermura. The locals, loyal to the Germans or simply fearful, alerted the coastal guards. Within hours, a German patrol surrounded them. Outnumbered and without the terrain advantage, the commandos surrendered after a brief firefight. Their weapons and documents were seized, including maps and radio codes identifying them as American soldiers. According to the Geneva Convention, captured commandos in uniform were to be treated as prisoners of war. But the men's fate had already been sealed. The German commander in La Spezia reported the capture to higher headquarters. The response came directly from Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, invoking Hitler's infamous Kommandobefehl, or Commando Order, issued in 1942. The order stated that all Allied commandos captured in Europe, even if in uniform, were to be executed immediately without trial. No exceptions. The OSS team, though they had fought honorably, were now marked for death. On March 26, 1944, 3 days after their capture, the 11 OSS commandos were transported to La Spezia's military barracks. There, under the supervision of German officers, they were lined up against a stone wall. Each man was shot once in the back of the head. Their bodies were buried in shallow graves near the beach, without identification. The execution was carried out in complete secrecy. Official German records listed them only as enemy saboteurs eliminated. The OSS, unaware of their fate, continued to send coded transmissions into the void, hoping for a reply that never came. It wasn't until after the war, during the Nuremberg trials, that the truth emerged. Allied investigators discovered documents detailing the execution, signed and authorized at the highest levels of German command. Among the evidence was Kesselring's transmission confirming the enforcement of the Commando Order. In 1948, the bodies of the 11 men were exhumed and brought home to the United States. They were buried with full military honors at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in Missouri. Their story remained classified for years, lost among the thousands of wartime files that the OSS had locked away. One of the recovered field notes from Lieutenant Russo's pack contained a single unfinished sentence, believed to have been written shortly before their capture. "If we fail, it won't be for lack of trying." Those words became a quiet tribute among OSS veterans, a reminder of the invisible sacrifices made by operatives whose missions were never meant to be known. Operation Ginny 2 stands today as a symbol of the extreme risks faced by wartime intelligence units, men who fought not for glory, but for a chance to change the tide, even by inches. It also served as crucial evidence in the prosecution of war crimes after 1945. The execution of the Ginny commandos demonstrated the moral line crossed by Hitler's regime and underscored why such secrecy, while essential in espionage, came at a terrible human cost. In the aftermath, the OSS redoubled its efforts in Europe. Each mission was more carefully planned, each infiltration better coordinated. Yet the shadow of Ginny 2 lingered, a haunting reminder that the world of clandestine warfare offered no guarantees. The following year, the OSS would launch another high-risk operation, one not of sabotage but of survival. This mission would take place not on land, but in the dark skies over Europe, where courage was measured in altitude and silence. It was known simply as Operation Carpetbagger. By 1944, the Allies had established a firm foothold in Western Europe, but victory was still far from certain. The D-Day landings had succeeded, yet the fight to liberate France and the Low Countries depended not only on open combat but on the silent resistance movements scattered across occupied territory. Their lifeline came from the skies in a series of secret operations run by the OSS and the U.S. Army Air Forces. Among them was one of the most daring and least understood aerial campaigns of World War II, Operation Carpetbagger. Codenamed for its crew's ability to deliver supplies and agents where they didn't belong, Operation Carpetbagger was the airborne artery of Allied espionage. Beginning in January 1944, specially modified B-24 Liberator bombers flew from Harrington Airfield in Northamptonshire, England, under the command of Colonel Clifford Heflin. Their mission: to drop OSS and SOE agents, weapons, radios, and money to resistance groups in Nazi-occupied Europe, particularly in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The operation's secrecy was absolute. These aircraft flew at night, alone, without navigation lights, and often without fighter escort. Crews navigated by moonlight, relying on dead reckoning and coded ground signals, 3 flashes of light, or a single torch sweeping across a field, to find their drop zones. The slightest mistake could mean disaster. Flying too high risked missing the target, too low and they risked detection by German searchlights and flak batteries. Each mission began in silence. As the crews gathered in briefing rooms lined with blackout curtains, they were handed sealed envelopes labeled only with a code name: Spindle, Basket, Jacques. Inside were maps of rural France marked with small circles, fields, vineyards, or forest clearings. The names of the agents they were delivering were never spoken aloud. To protect everyone involved, pilots and drop masters often didn't know who or what they carried. They simply followed coordinates, trusting the system that had been built from layers of secrecy. To adapt the massive B-24s for covert work, engineers stripped away their defensive turrets and heavy armaments, replacing them with cargo chutes and drop compartments. The aircraft were painted matte black to blend with the night. When they descended to as low as 400 feet, the crew would open the bomb bay doors and release containers packed with Sten guns, explosives, medical supplies, and food, all packed in straw to cushion the fall. Parachutes were color-coded: white for supplies, brown for personnel, and green for sabotage materials. Resistance groups on the ground, often composed of farmers, students, and ex-soldiers, would race to recover the drops before dawn. Many of them paid with their lives. German patrols were relentless, combing the countryside for signs of Allied contact. Yet, despite the danger, the deliveries continued, sometimes 5 or 6 missions a night. By the eve of D-Day, carpetbagger crews had dropped more than 500 tons of supplies and inserted over 400 agents across Europe. One of those agents was Virginia Hall, the legendary OSS operative already hunted by the Gestapo. In March 1944, she was flown into central France aboard a carpetbagger B-24 and parachuted into a small meadow near Kosny. From there, she coordinated sabotage missions that crippled German reinforcements during the Normandy invasion. Pilots later recalled her code name, Marie, appearing on their mission briefings with a single instruction: do not fail. But not every mission ended in success. Many carpetbagger planes vanished without trace. Navigational errors, mechanical failures, or German anti-aircraft fire could doom entire crews. Some were shot down over France and the Netherlands. Others crashed in the Alps or North Sea. Their fates remained unknown for decades. Villagers who found wreckage sometimes buried the dead in secret, leaving handwritten notes for Allied authorities to find after liberation. Even today, pieces of twisted metal lie scattered across French fields, silent monuments to those who flew in darkness. Colonel Heflin's men became legends among those who knew of them. Their accuracy was unmatched, so precise that the French resistance leader Jean Moulin once said, "The carpetbaggers deliver with the precision of a postman." Yet, because their work was classified, few outside intelligence circles ever heard their names. After the war, many returned home to quiet lives, never speaking of the missions that had helped turn the tide in Europe. Declassified OSS and U.S. Air Force records later revealed how much depended on their courage. Carpetbagger flights provided critical supplies that allowed sabotage of rail lines, bridges, and communication hubs in the weeks before D-Day. Resistance networks armed by these drops delayed German troop movements to Normandy, saving countless Allied lives. The success of the invasion and the liberation of Western Europe was, in part, written in the shadows traced by those black-painted B-24s. Still, even within the OSS, some mysteries remained. Several missions disappeared completely from operational logs, erased without explanation. Historians speculate that these involved high-value agents or experimental technology, perhaps early prototypes of radar jamming equipment or encrypted communication systems. Whatever their purpose, those flights were never officially acknowledged. One surviving carpetbagger pilot, Captain Robert Henson, reflected decades later, "We flew in silence. No lights, no names, no recognition. You did your job, dropped your cargo, and prayed to make it back to Harrington. If you didn't, well, no one asked questions. That was the nature of the work." Operation Carpetbagger continued until the spring of 1945, when the collapse of German control made further supply runs unnecessary. By then, over 3,000 missions had been flown. Yet the operation's full story remained classified until the 1980s. Only then did the world learn how close the OSS had worked with the brave men and women of the underground, and how many had disappeared into the night without record. As the war drew to a close, the OSS work was far from over. Their missions had changed the course of history, but their secrecy ensured that few would ever know it. And as Europe celebrated liberation, the question arose: what would become of the OSS itself, an agency built for war now facing a world at peace? That answer, and the legacy of its shadow warriors, would shape the future of intelligence and define the dawn of the Cold War. Next came the final chapter, the secret dismantling of the OSS, and the birth of the modern intelligence world from its classified ashes. By the summer of 1945, Europe was silent again, but it was not peace that filled the air. It was uncertainty. Cities lay in ruins, borders were redrawn, and alliances that had seemed unbreakable during the war were already beginning to fracture. Amid this fragile calm, the Office of Strategic Services, the invisible backbone of America's secret war, faced an uncertain fate. Its mission had been born in chaos and forged in secrecy. But now, as victory banners waved, its very existence was being questioned. The OSS had accomplished what few thought possible. Its operatives had infiltrated occupied Europe, rescued airmen, sabotaged railways, and intercepted scientific secrets that could have changed the outcome of the war. Yet with Germany's surrender in May 1945 and Japan's in August, many in Washington wondered whether America still needed a secret army. President Harry S. Truman, focused on post-war reconstruction and wary of unchecked power, moved swiftly to dismantle the agency. On October 1, 1945, by presidential order, the OSS was officially dissolved. In less than 48 hours, the organization that had once spanned 4 continents ceased to exist. Its research and analysis branch, the division responsible for intelligence reports and enemy assessments, was transferred to the State Department. Its operations branch, responsible for covert missions, sabotage, and espionage, was absorbed by the War Department under a new name, the Strategic Services Unit, or SSU. Donovan's dream of a permanent, independent intelligence service seemed to have ended as abruptly as it began. For Wild Bill Donovan himself, it was a bitter moment. His vision had always extended beyond wartime. He believed America needed a centralized intelligence agency to face the uncertain world ahead, particularly as tensions with the Soviet Union deepened. In his final report to Truman, Donovan warned, "America cannot afford to return to pre-war unpreparedness. The battle for security will not end with victory, it will merely change its form." His words would prove prophetic. As the OSS faded from public view, its operatives dispersed. Some returned home, blending back into civilian life without ever speaking of their missions. Others were quietly reassigned to new intelligence offices, laying the groundwork for what would soon become the Central Intelligence Agency. Their fieldwork, the clandestine networks, the covert drop zones, the coded transmissions, would become the foundation of modern espionage. But many secrets died with the OSS. Thousands of its files were sealed, their contents marked top secret, and stored in classified vaults. Within those files were the detailed records of operations that even today remain only partially understood, missions conducted in enemy territory, assassinations prevented or executed, disappearances never explained. Some OSS historians believe that up to a third of the agency's wartime operations remain undisclosed, their details either lost or deliberately erased during the chaotic post-war transition. Among these mysteries were rumors of lost operatives, agents sent into Central Europe in the final months of the war who never returned. Some were believed to have been captured by Soviet forces as the Red Army swept westward. Others simply vanished, their names absent from official rosters. In the early years of the Cold War, OSS veterans would quietly trade stories of these men and women, whispers of missions that blurred the line between the end of one war and the beginning of another. Even as the OSS disappeared, its influence echoed across the world. In Germany, former OSS agents helped rebuild local governments and hunt down Nazi war criminals. In Asia, OSS veterans played key roles in supporting anti-colonial movements and stabilizing the post-war Pacific. Their methods, coded transmissions, intelligence networks, and psychological operations, became the new standard for covert diplomacy. One of the most striking legacies was the human factor. The OSS had proven that effective intelligence was not only about technology or weapons, but about people, linguists, scientists, soldiers, and civilians united by purpose. Their adaptability became the model for future intelligence training. The agency's unofficial motto, borrowed from Donovan himself, still resonates today: "The secret of success is freedom, and the secret of freedom is courage." When the Central Intelligence Agency was established in 1947 under the National Security Act, it inherited more than just personnel from the OSS, it inherited a philosophy. The quiet courage of the men and women who had operated behind enemy lines became the moral blueprint for a new kind of warfare: invisible, psychological, and global. The OSS had been an experiment, born of desperation and necessity, but its shadow would stretch far into the Cold War. And yet, even now, questions remain. Some OSS missions, like those launched in the final months of 1945, remain redacted in government archives. What secrets were too dangerous to reveal? What agreements, forged in the darkness of wartime Europe, carried over into the tense years that followed? Historians continue to uncover fragments, coded memos, missing personnel lists, unmarked graves, each offering glimpses into the agency's final, unseen operations. The OSS had no monuments, no public parades, and no victory marches. Its heroes were buried under silence, their stories scattered across the classified pages of history. But their legacy endures, not in the medals they never received, but in the freedom their unseen battles helped preserve. In the end, the OSS was more than an agency. It was an idea that information could be a weapon, that courage could exist without recognition, and that sometimes the greatest victories are those no one ever sees. The story of the 5 most secret OSS operations of World War II hidden from history is not just a chronicle of covert missions. It is a testament to the invisible warriors who fought in the world's darkest hours, and whose courage shaped the future long after the guns fell silent.